Я приветствую вас, дорогие друзья.
Hello, dear friends, guests, and subscribers to my channel, to the channel of Alexey Arestovich. Alexey is joining us now here on the stream. Hello, Alexey. Good evening. Thank you, everybody, for being so patient, waiting for us. I know we've been a little off schedule with this stream, and huge thanks to all of you who support us in streams and questions and direct messages. And we do have a ton of things to discuss today. First, about the format of our discussion, it's traditional. You do see a couple of barcodes at the bottom. One next to Alexey is the link to his School of Personal Growth, and the one near me is a way to ask a question that we can voice during the stream, during our Q&A session. And also, of course, you can ask the question in our live chat under the stream. Although it's better to put the question a little bit before the stream. We've been gathering them for about 3 days. And let's discuss. We will connect the chat over at the bottom of the show. So communication will be at large. We'll be discussing a lot of interesting things today. And basically get ready. Let's start traditionally with our usual question on my channel. It sounds like this. Why does Zelensky need new cabinet of ministers? And the options to answer. 1. He's hiding his tracks. 2. He wants to be liked by Trump. 3. He's feeling the crumbling, the destruction. And number 4, he's trying to paint everybody with illegitimacy. So you have seen the list presented by Rahamia. Shmyhal now is a Minister of Defense. A long list. What do you think it changes, Alexey? Well, if to choose between these versions, these options to answer, I think the main thing is that he feels the crumbling of everything. The main feature of this cabinet of ministers change is minimization of ministries. The numbers are reduced. So when situation gets out of control, what do? We usually limit the number of options to still be able to control it. So like in this phone that I'm holding, right, there is a ton of options. We're probably using about 5% of all the different things that the phone can do. Most people use what they know, what they're familiar with. Same thing as somebody who likes driving his old car would not want to easily jump onto new EV like Tesla and such. So why do you want to simplify things when things become a little too complex? Because the management contour is usually matching the level of intellect, the level of comprehension of the one who is running the system. So they're getting rid of elements in a system that they cannot understand or do not support. For example, sometimes it's a good thing. We had a Ministry of Youth and a Ministry of Sports, which are essentially we're doing similar things, and sports and cultural activities. So they got rid of one of them. And otherwise, when they're shrinking other elements, some functional elements as well, then it indicates that they sense the beginning of the end. They sense the destruction is reaching a certain level that it's difficult to manage, and they're trying to shrink. Regarding Shmyhal, it is not important that he is the Minister of Defense now, but that the Minister of Defense will now be leading, he as a Minister of Defense in this role will be leading negotiations with Russia. That gives them an opportunity, Zelensky government, an opportunity to say that, look, ex-Prime Minister, Minister of Defense is now leading the negotiations on our side, and you have some historian. Like some historian, that was a phrase coined by Rutte from EU, and well, the fun fact is that he is a historian himself, and he tried to laugh at some Medinsky on the Russian delegation, and this is a masked attempt to laugh at a representative leading Russian delegation. Some people treat it as masked racism of a sort, that Russians are not exactly people compared to us here in the EU. And I think that is a thing that comes out here and there, that sticks out, and it's part of the reasons for this war. All right, Alexey, so in the context of manageability and control, here's a question to you. Zelensky came out today, he was talking to the phone again, and he talked about the following things. That Smetanin will be leading Ukraine industrial military production complex, and he outlined that the task of all the reshuffling is to enhance, and from 40% manufactured by Ukraine of its own arms for the war, that Ukraine should strive now to reach 50%. Can you evaluate or give the judgment to the statement? Right, Alexander, there was a key story related with the Ministry of Industry that has not taken wing. They've changed 3 ministers in hopes for it to fly, but nothing happened. I remember how it was created. I was against creating this ministry during the discussions about national security. Because, listen, we have 4 different organizations which are importing and exporting different arms into the country. Why? Because it creates 4 different options for different buddies and friends to earn money, to get profits of different kinds from corrupt sales. Well, look, in Ukraine we do have 4 different organizations dealing in major production issues of equipment for armed forces. Meantime, last year order paid for by the country, by the government, is not fulfilled for 50%. So you have a ton of organs, a ton of branches of executive power, sub-branches, responsible for delivering armaments to Ukraine military, but it does not seem to work. Zelensky is not talking about how poorly that order was fulfilled. 240 billion hryvnias are under investigation. One of the congressmen recently published said that in their research they discovered that it was up to 240 billion hryvnias were paid, were wired. Somebody got this money. Somebody maybe reinvested somewhere or withdrew them from the country, but the army got 0 from these amounts. And that's like a traditional saying, 7 nannies have a kid without an eye. So concentration of power is a natural decision. Minister of Defense is being combined with Minister of Technical Industry Production, and they take an ex-prime minister who has been at his position for 5 years. This is one of the longest holders of this position, at least in Ukraine's history, maybe even on a global scale. I don't know if any other prime minister managed to stay in power for over 5 years. So in hopes to put a stop to the mess happening in Ministry of Defense and all this variety of different ministries around it, they place Shmyhal to run the processes. Zelensky is avoiding discussion about the amount of money lost over the orders for military equipment, because he's always presented only as the victorious person, so he does not or ever admit mistakes. And unfortunately, that's why mistakes are being corrected much later. If Zelensky would have come out and acknowledged that he made a mistake, Ukrainian people would have probably forgiven him, but he's not doing that. He's saying that we will be increasing the production of our armaments internally. So we're not talking about the negatives, we're talking about growing it from 40% to 50% now. These are the goals. So this is a communication strategy. He is lying and covering for it, is not naming real reasons for his reshuffling, and he's playing a game of PR that we had 40%, now we'll shoot for 50% of our own military equipment manufactured here in Ukraine. So nothing generally changes in the country, and it likely won't. Like in the old anecdote, that plumber who looked at everything in the Kremlin and said, yeah, you need to change the whole system here, right? So very ineffective use of money, very ineffective use of controls, and very ineffective use of placing government contracts. So do you think Alexey Umerov had won in this situation? Oh, definitely. He scored pretty well, and he likely will be an ambassador somewhere now. But the question remains how his ministry transferred almost $5 billion to different manufacturers who have not delivered on these promises. Where did the money go, right? So 240 billion hryvnias were paid by Minister of Defense. They were dropped to the accounts of the companies, supposedly contractors, and nothing happened, right? There is no persecution, there is no investigation, there is nothing about that. Army is still waiting for equipment, so direly needed on the front, yet the money are somewhere, right? Could you imagine Comrade Stalin allowing somebody to survive after such lack of delivery? Or maybe even Putin. I don't know about Putin. I think Stalin, Alexei, would probably have executed them all summarily. Even Putin, he does not execute Alexander, but he has several dozen of his generals under investigation. Many of them are in jail. Oh, right. Some of them are already offing themselves in different suicides, a different variety of those during his rule, right? Right, so there is at least some pressure on them to deliver. In Ukraine, unfortunately, we do not know how to control that, or do not control it on purpose. Alexey Nikolaevich, so Sviridenko, is she a good prime minister? I don't know how good of a prime minister she is, but definitely she's a good of a person. Just personally, she's a great character. How professional she is, I have not heard attacks on her for her previous work, but I don't know if she will be able to step up and integrate a bunch of different ministries and organizations in war times effectively. Mariana Bezuglia is already hinting that at this position she'll be just singing the same songs that are sung by Yermak, save him from attending a few meetings, but we'll see. It's never that straightforward. We'll see how she will hold her opinion. She does have her opinion. Nobody knows what kind of a prime minister she'll be. And I don't think she knows it herself. As a human, as a person, I have very positive experience with her, and I think she's good. And not to attack her here, but this is a separate point. This is not about her. But another thing I want to mention is that a lot of people who were later found of corruption were very nice in negotiating and communicating. So not to attack her, we don't know how she'll be, but this is a risk. And a threat, this is always a threat for a bureaucrat to use his own position for personal gain. Any politician, when you take a big position, where they can use it to their own advantage. Well, in life, they're, of course, charming. Deep people, reading Hegel, Faust, listening to our casts with Burmistrov, even telling me how fascinated they are with the depths of some discussions. Everything will be good, will prevail, everything will be okay. And then later you find that, oops, they've stolen some money from the army that is fighting for the lives of them and their friends and families on the front. Well, Alexei, not for themselves, right, as the saying goes, not for yourself, but for family and friends. Exactly right. All right, guys, don't forget to vote. What do you think about this new cabinet of ministers? It's curious how and with what side dishes will it be served at the end of its term. And it's curious why Zelensky is looking to change his government. Another thing, Zelensky today in Newsmax gave an interesting phrase commenting on the situation with war. He's saying that Putin does not want to stop this war because he is afraid that 1.2 million people will come back from the front line to Russia and they'll instigate a lot of turmoil in the country upon their return. However, he is not talking about 1 million strong army of Ukraine, which is a much higher percentage of ballpark population of the country. He is not talking about that, any risks related with that. And he is making another vow in the direction of Trump, that Trump will be the one who will stop this war. Trump is not Biden. Trump will figure out how to finish this war. So do you think Trump can? What is that about? That story of fakes that Trump supposedly asked Zelensky to attack St. Petersburg and Moscow, that he's giving Zelensky some tomahawks and special missiles, and then it evaporated under the sun when Trump and his press secretary, Leavitt, came out and said, no, nothing of the kind. And they're saying that Trump is not on anybody's side and this is not exactly his war. So can Trump finish this war if he's not taking sides? Well, let's first of all, Alexander, talk about people coming back home from war. even if you're a victorious president who's been in power for a few years, you do need to turn your brains on. I understand it's a difficult process, but still at least once a year. Now let's look at the numbers in Russia. The army has grown another time. Before that, the army was 1 million personnel strong, and now legally they can recruit up to 1.5 millions. So imagine this war ends with victory or loss, or neither victory nor loss. He's saying that this group will go back to Russia. So do you think that Putin will disband his army immediately at the end of the war, and they all go home to smoke, drink, and destroy whatever they see? These are troops. They will very likely go to their dislocations. They will have their own military police. They'll be doing some post-war work that needs to be done. There'll be DA's office. There'll be FSB controlling them. Of course, there'll be some issues with post-traumatic syndrome and some other behavioral things. But it's very difficult to imagine that Russia will somehow not be able to figure out what to do with all these people coming back from war. Soviet Union went through much bigger mobilization, getting reintegrated after this war. Nobody remembers the difficult times of mass reintegration after war, but they remember the cold summer of 1953 when Beria let a lot of Gulag prisoners out. So Putin has a different problem. Putin has an issue: where does he raise more troops? Because they need now to match that 1.5 million on paper, but they need to recruit people to those detachments, and they need to beef up their detachments in the borders with Baltic countries, with Finland. So I do not see that as a significant threat that these soldiers will, upon return from the war in Ukraine, will go back to Russia and change the government. No. Same thing as in Ukraine. After troops return home, they will not change much. Just don't even expect that. As for different information fakes, listen, Trump's team is stitched from very different people. And there are people of very different views and opinions in his team. Many of them are not friendly. Some of them seriously are at opposition to each other. For example, Musk was a member of that team for a while, but now he is trying to create a third party, or go the third way. There are some rumors that he was even fighting with somebody. And all these scandals about Epstein lists that Trump government promised to release, and now they're not releasing them. So just looking at that, one can deduce that everything in his team is rather difficult. Perhaps you've noticed that Tulsi Gabbard is not speaking too much recently. She was one of the most active speakers in the early times of his campaign and early government, but she's nowhere to be seen mostly now. So there probably is some part of his team that was pouring different leaks in the media, and the other part was actively resisting that. And Trump was coming out and saying that, of course, we have never promised that. And the second option, what could have happened, is that Zelensky and Yermak were spreading these rumors. Wait a second, Alexei, why would they spread these rumors? To set up Trump? Aren't they trying to be liked by Trump? Don't they want the contracts and military munitions to continue being supplied to Ukraine from states? For example, the story with bombing of presidential palace in Syria, this is a good marker. Now, on the Middle East, there'll be likely another conflict with different forces, Turks and Syrians, and Europe supposedly supporting Syria somehow. So it will likely be very not boring. And NATO and arms will have to be diverted to that conflict too. And of course, all these supplies to Ukraine promised that Europe will pay for it and America will then supply. Nothing turns out to be actually happening. So Zelensky should be a much milder in relation to Trump, right? Oh, Alexander, you should actually stop on this for a sec. Understand the elegance. Somebody invented that, either Trump or somebody in his team said that we are not going to supply to Ukraine anything. Europe will pay money for that, and we will sell them arms, and we'll actually make money on this. And of course, his election base is mostly conservative. Most of the military-industrial complex is owned by his electorate, and they're definitely greeting it with cheer. But they'll be transferring these arms to NATO, and NATO will transfer these arms to Ukraine. So if anything misjives, if anything misfires, that's not on US, that's on NATO. Remember, there was time when I said, until America figures out how to make money on this war, they will never be really supporting us. Now they figured it. But EU is taking note. France is saying, oh, no, we're not going to pay for that, which is understandable. They were hoping to sell their own arms. They have their own full cycle of production. They were hoping to sell their own French arms to Ukraine. Italy is saying, we have no money. Czech Republic, with their Peter Paul, are saying, well, you know, we have other sources to support Ukraine when we don't have dedicated money to do that. So EU suddenly has no money to buy American arms. What about Germans, Alexei? Oh, of course, Germans. Germans are actively negotiating with America in the trade war, so US does not increase the import percent on European goods up to 30% in August. So look at the bigger picture. They have not negotiated these tariffs yet. And then they're already jumping in saying that, oh, absolutely, we will buy tens of billions of dollars worth of American military equipment to transfer to Ukraine, while they have not finished the trade war issues. This is a farce. This is just a fakery. And some of the countries already coming out in Europe saying, we do not have money, we cannot afford it. As for the countries of the Middle East, the borders of Turkey and Israel are coming closer, the areas of influence, so that you understand, after Assad's regime collapse and Giovanni rising to power, in Israeli forces, they got a bunch of training materials with the silhouettes of Turkish equipment, military equipment now, that they practice on. So they are preparing to potential conflict. Now, what's happening with Druze ethnicity, who are on the border between Syria and Israel? So these new authorities in Syria, used to be considered terrorists, are now attacking and taking away some of the freedoms of these people. So Trump, who, remember, at some point had announced that $10 million reward for the head of new Syria ruler when he was treated as terrorist. They are now shaking his hands, right? So now Israel is trying to figure out what are they doing with this situation. They attacked about 167 targets, including General Command of Syrian Army, live on air, with the hints that they also attacked different communication outposts of Syrian Army, and are saying that, guys, you have to slow the attackers down, that Druze should not be in danger. Otherwise, you will be facing more retribution from us. 2 divisions of Israel military are there in the north, ready to jump in. But behind Giovanni his back is definitely supported by Turkey. So everybody are waiting for a proxy war between Israel and Turkey. And from Turkey, it will be a proxy war, but for Israel, it likely will be a conventional war. And it's not a simple story. Likely, the United States will have to figure a way out of this conflict for both sides, because that potentially is a war between a NATO member with the closest ally outside of NATO. So what do Zelensky government do? They need to ring all the bells to attract more attention. So let's play it out. Trump wakes out in the morning and reads in the news that he was telling Zelensky to attack Moscow and St. Petersburg in Russia. So he needs to come out and say, yes, I did, no, I did not, or I need to make my mind. I have not made my mind yet. So if he's saying, no, I did not, never encouraged him, then Ukrainian government can jump for joy and say, listen, Trump is not really supporting us. Otherwise, Russia would have felt the pain and Putin would have gone for negotiations, right? The other way, if Trump comes out and says, sure, yeah, you can attack whatever you can, then they can say, oh, listen, we're great, where Trump is supporting us, we'll hit Russia everywhere where it hurts, and we'll force them to negotiate. And when Trump says, I have not made my mind, they can play their cards saying, well, in reality, he actually allowed us to. He's just not talking about that in the open. Therefore, they're forcing President of the United States to take position. And they're trying to channel him to certain decisions, or at least make a decision. And they're doing very effective PR. They're buying a lot of articles in United States media. An article in New York Times is about $150,000, and of course, that's what they're doing. They're paying money and lobbying for the interests in the American media. That's how it works. So, Alexey, what is that super idea that Zelensky talked today about? By the way, thank you everybody for sticking with us. Do not forget to click that like button. This is super crucial to support us. What is that story? It's being repeated as a mantra of some sorts. And today we hear that Russians will regret that they have not agreed to a ceasefire, because we are now moving this war to the territory of Russian Federation. And, it's a good thing that they then somewhat slowed down after the initial statement. And I wanted to show to our viewers that miracle of the miracles. This is an interceptor drone. This is what it looks like. This is a very symbolic object to attack all the geraniums and other UAVs. And they initially propped it out as the new solution. Now it's a little slower. They kind of walking it back, saying that that purple ray doesn't quite work as effective as expected. But now apparently there is a new purple ray that we're now attacking Russian Federation deep at home. What strategy it is, Alexander? This is not strategy. This is what we are strong, what Ukraine is strong in, public relations. We have a ton of people manufacturing a bunch of UAVs, different models, different names. In reality, there are only 2 or 3 big manufacturers who are producing them en masse and supporting the army. Everybody else, just individual creations. So, of course, different dealers and leaders of public opinion coming out, the singers of the unknown garage-based industrial complex, coming out and saying that, of course, back 200 years ago, we're saying that we will be intercepting Russian UAVs with these interceptors. All these leaders were going to public schools when I was already supporting our industry to build up a new interceptor drone. And they actually succeeded in creating a certain panic in Russian Z channels, pro-war channels that are panicking, saying, wait a second, they may be actually now able to intercept our stuff. And then Ukraine comes in again and says, oh, wait a sec, we're now getting Tomahawks, so we'll be hitting you at home, Russian enemies. And the next piece of news, likely they'll talk about it again. They talked about it before, about some long-range Ukrainian missile that will fly far and hit Kremlin roof. But how Pavel Shelin recently mentioned in some of the interviews, Russians do not know how to play the game of PR, while Ukrainians are really effective at it. Russians cannot even address these PRs. Dmitry Medvedev sometimes goes to Twitter or to X and writes some heavily censored posts. He doesn't censor them. The media has to censor. And after that, what? 400, 500 UAVs are flying to Ukraine. So Russians are failing in public relations. They're just attacking the targets. And Ukrainians need somehow to... Ukrainian government creates a view where Ukrainian citizens somehow, while weathering the attacks of Russia, we do have ways to bomb and to attack them, and actually we are winning. So we are somehow promised that we'll be attacking Moscow, and then we're seeing that Russians are attacking Ukraine throughout its whole territory. How to connect these two things, it's unknown for me. So they're trying to connect it with long-range Ukrainian missiles, with maybe destroying something in Kremlin. These are fantastic promises, and for 2 weeks, people will probably be happy about it. They'll get some dopamine, and they'll be saying that we're great in bombing Russian Federation, just a little more, and it'll bend and break, and we will prevail. Our long-range UAVs and the opinion of Russian economic analyst in exile Lipsitz will definitely put an end to Putin's economy and his army. And then Nevzorov will also come out, another talking head in immigration. So this will be our victory. And this is the foam that is created by Zelensky government in the media. In reality, there is a steamroller. Very primitive, very dumb, still corrupt, but it still rolls. And it rolls very slow, very suboptimally, not impressive for a big vehicle like Russia is. They're not really effective. But this is like about the bear and two hunters. I don't need to run as a world champion. I just need to run faster than you. So Russia, all they need to do is run one step faster than Ukraine does. And they're pretty good at it. Russia is definitely not using its potential well. It could have benefited by being in better hands, but not likely going to be in the near future. Ukraine, I don't think, has been in good hands for a long time and cannot get itself organized, as we can see during these war times. So over that cacophony of purple rays, as I was referring to the literary work, giving some hope to Ukrainian people, over that foam of media and PR, Russian steamroller is still rolling. And we would prefer if we can maybe somehow increase our production output for military articles and get more aid from the West. Unfortunately, I don't think we will be able as a country to get both. And I think we already understand how will this war end if miracle will not happen. Because a small corrupt dictatorship cannot win, cannot prevail over a large corrupt dictatorship. That's it. That's the whole story. And for us to systemically attack Russian depth with our fire, with our means of attack, that would start really diminishing their military output. That would have been interesting. And we remember we had a story with us attacking their oil refineries, right? It was a very effective campaign. But have you heard that Russia ran out of gas, ran out of kerosene? It was a big problem. We brought down the output by 12 or 13% of this industry. This was outstanding military success. And what? To achieve 30, 40%, that's when you start seeing some shortages and continue destruction regardless of their attempts to fix it, and continue maybe growing this tempo for about half a year so that Russia would not be able to call your influence on their industry. That would have pressed Putin to negotiate, perhaps. But any one-time attacks, even if we manage to collapse some roofs in Kremlin or even wound Putin, that will not lead to anything effective. However, we'll probably put a big PR campaign around it. Now, another thing, what did Trump do? If he would have told Putin behind the scenes, Vlad, listen, you got 50 more days to fight, to achieve whatever you want to achieve still in this campaign. But after that, I'm coming with heavy weapons if you're not stopping. That would probably push Putin to negotiate, because America has ways to hurt Russia. Russia can be hurt by the United States with significant sanctions, and they can cause big systemic issues. Not fully destroy, but cause pain. But Trump had said that publicly. So if Putin now obeys that, he loses his face. So whatever Putin does, if he follows Trump's ultimatum, that he has those 50 days to make a decision, he basically cannot follow. Because if he follows Trump's ultimatum, he loses power, he loses his influence, so he cannot directly do that. So Putin can only go forward, he cannot go back. And I doubt now we have a capacity to attack Russia more effectively than what we've done with their refineries, which was a great success, but we failed to continue pressing on this front. And second, without facing much risks from Ukraine, Putin is facing Trump's ultimatum that also doesn't let him go back. So my statement here, my expectation is his steamroller will likely continue going. Now, they're somewhat slow in their advance, which is understandable because very often that's what's happening while they're aggregating more weapons, more arms on the front. So let's see if we can actually continue the tempo of attacking Russian infrastructure somehow, and if we can bring any of the long-range arms to the front. So we'll see how Putin will fare, regardless of their losses on the front. Ukraine, unfortunately, I do not see being capable of causing moral defeat to Russia compared to 22nd, when we did the Kharkov operation successfully there, or pushed them from Kherson. I think Russia had passed through the most difficult moments for themselves. And yeah, we were beating them at that year rather well. So what? They do have a thing called long will. If you can see how Germans were fighting with the Red Army, Germans were holding tactical success till the end of war. Their jets were shooting down, their planes were shooting down more Russian planes than the other way. Russian tanks were being decimated by German tanks. And the losses of Germany were much smaller than losses of Red Army. Wehrmacht was definitely fighting more effectively. But then, strategically, Russia still managed to win the war. Yes, they've lost 10 million people, or however many you count, just in the armed forces. But the war finished in the destroyed Berlin. The history has a tendency of repeating itself. Yes, the West is technically advanced. Ukrainians are very creative. With the help of the West, they're causing significant losses to Russian Federation. We, Ukrainians, can do that, and the West can cause significant pain to Russia with sanctions and can damage it successfully. And this is not going to be an easy walk for Russia. This is definitely a bloody grind where they lose tens of thousands on the way. But the truth remains that Russia still continues to press and their steamroller continues to roll. And if you look at the interviews of the most sober people in the Ukrainian media field, Taras Chmyl, for example, they're acknowledging that Russia is more advanced in the tempo of production. We perhaps succeed in certain tactical operations, but overall they have more resource. And they're just a little bit more effective than Ukraine. 15 to 20% more effective, and that's what they achieve with the existence of their corrupt as it is machine under Putin. And this is the long-term perspective of this war. Now, for those Ukrainians who want to see some advances on the front, sure, we will get some arms. We likely will have some long-range missiles, and they will likely be used successfully on Russia. And Russia will likely be screaming, how did it happen that Ukraine attacked Kremlin? But it does not change long-term trend. Because long-term trends need to be changed by very systemic efforts, which are not on the table for Ukraine at its current leadership, ways of management, and the West is not going to fight directly with Russia. They will be slapping sanctions on it, but sanctions are not going to stop Russians. They will likely tighten their belts by 2 more holes, and like in that anecdote, Daddy, the vodka is more expensive now, you'll drink less? No, you'll eat less, son. So they'll continue fighting. A very interesting, nuanced comment. Thank you, Alexey. And let's not leave this topic too far. You've been bringing to the light the events of the Second World War here. Here's an article from Lviv that is ready to exchange the remnants of NKVD policemen from Soviet Union to Ukrainian prisoners of war. They basically dug up the glory hole, the glory hill, how it was called in the Soviet times. There is about 355 soldiers of Soviet army buried there. So these remains were removed from that hill, and they are to be reburied somewhere. But then somebody had an idea to exchange those remnants from Second World War to alive Ukrainian soldiers. Yeah, that's bright in quotes idea, because I would suspect that probably 2/3 of these remnants are Ukrainian soldiers from Soviet times, because it was Ukrainian front that was liberating this area of war. That's exactly why I do not like our Ukrainian project, because it's mortal. It's martyra. They are joking about death. It's like a cult of cemeteries, a cult of death. I understand that, of course, you need to appreciate the fallen warriors, but the cult is in making sure everybody is on their knees. And if you do not go on the knees, then you will be penalty. You'll face penalties. And these laws are being passed through our Congress. So, meantime, we're digging out the fallen soldiers. This is a wrong move. Even Mujahideen in Afghanistan were not destroying monuments to the fighters. They destroyed some, but monument, they never dug out the remnants. So Lviv, the area that lived on the money of Russian tourists, they decided somehow that it makes sense to dig out the remains of people who died liberating this territory over 80 years ago in exchange for current Ukrainian fighters. Okay, I mean, it's a great story to try to return our people back, but to do that by these means, it just shows how unethical this whole new anti-Ukraine project is, inspired by Zelensky's government. Absolutely unethical. Russia very often has excesses of the executors when they torture our prisoners, when they kill and rape and destroy their bodies, and when they come back from prison weighing a third of what they did before. That shows that Russian lower ranks are definitely problematic. Well, a lot of post-Soviet people are somewhat damaged, but digging out the bodies of fallen soldiers and try to exchange them for current soldiers or remnants of those who died in this war, Russians have not come to that level of low. I think we're comparing very incomparable things now. In Ukraine, they're trying to fill in with some symbolism that Russian prison supervisors are torturing Ukrainian prisoners of war. And they're presenting it as if Putin's government is sanctioning it. I don't think they're specifically sanctioning it. Yeah, they're responsible for it, but I don't think they have time or attention to dedicate to what's happening in those camps. However, when the mayor of our city comes out, the leader of the party, locally supported by his congressman, supposedly, and mayorate, and nobody attacks it for him for it, whom are we giving new arguments to? In Euro Parliament, they opened a genocide exhibit showing how Ukrainian insurgency army, what atrocities have they done during the Second World War. So you are giving more cards to those who started this exhibit, right? Look, they have done these things back in the day, and now they're digging out the corpses of Soviet soldiers, right? Is it the best thing we can invent? Sometimes I think some Ukrainian leaders are completely insane. The mayor of Ivano-Frankivsk recently came out and said, what do people in Kharkov understand? They're probably not fully developed there. We here speak Ukrainian, we have the religion we support. Down there in Kharkov, they can't even proper understand our culture. I can only ask a question here. How many research institutes were in Kharkov before this war? More than 20, right? Space, military production. Those doctors of sciences, what do they understand, right? We'll just teach you how to love motherland by only speaking language. So that horrible provincialism mixed with some necrophiliac cults is unfortunately, I think, the bane of our current Ukrainian vector under Zelensky administration. That definitely does not aid Ukraine to win this war, in winning this war. It doesn't even lead us to a difficult stalemate. Because these guys who have suggested these things for exchange, haven't they thought that they gave the vocabulary to the Polish side? The same vocabulary. Exhumation, exchange of bodies, right? They just don't see beyond a few steps. So speaking of Poland, Alexei, Orban seems to be on the crusade against Ukraine now. They picked the case when a person had joint citizenship of Hungary and Ukraine, and he was killed by officers of drafting commission, and they essentially started creating a case for Ukraine not being able to join EU because they are catching people by force. And Orban says that I will go to Brussels and I will be insisting on sanctions against the leadership of Ukraine because that is flourishing under Zelensky's leadership. Right. The nearest sanctions will likely be to anti-Moldova from Ukraine. Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia back in the day signed an agreement that they will be joining EU. Moldova did all the things they promised, and Maya Sandu is holding to the last moment, and Zelensky is fighting against this. He's pressing all buttons and calling upon all Calluses and everybody so that Moldova was not detached from Ukraine. But Moldova will probably be detached from Ukraine and will be adopted to EU separately. And that will be a huge signal that all Zelensky's aspirations to join EU have failed without even starting. And I'm not even talking about the demands of Ukrainian bureaucrats who are saying, let's limit the movement of our people after this war. Our people we do not limit our people's movements as EU. Well, we are a country at war. After the war, we still need our people here. Do you understand this is not acceptable? This is impossible for EU to agree to these terms. And all these European aspirations, they're about nothing. All these purple rays, all the fakery that we create, all the PR things we create in Ukraine, they're for naught. Orban, of course, is a big fan of these fantastical purple rays, and we're saying, as the Hungarian side saying that it was a murder, there is no official conclusion from the Ukrainian investigators. And they're just highlighting the statements, the recent article by Kievan blogger, how her beloved was recently captured and beaten up, how drafting commission bus was found with a body inside. So, of course, there are articles, there are excesses, and Orban is using very resonance examples that resonate with the EU, and he continues to hit where it cracks, where it's weak, and they will likely continue this effort. This is not even symbolic capital. This is a real death of a person with Hungarian passport, and if you pick all the other videos related to these excesses. Remember on Musk's X, there was a video that got a lot of likes, a lot of views, of people being beaten and fighting with drafting commission. That creates a narrative. And that can destroy any initiative, whatever initiative you have, NATO, financial aid, up to space development and growing up some hedgehogs to preserve their populations. EU can come back and say, look at what your drafting commission is doing. We cannot cooperate with people like that. And our own bureaucrats are giving a universal tool for anybody, both internally and externally, that can be used against us. Even Russians starting hitting drafting commissions now. Right, half of them wrote that were the Russian bots, probably, but the others are actually expressing their satisfaction. There are Ukrainian citizens who are cheering enemies' attacks on drafting commissions. This is a catastrophe for the country. Zelensky was melting, and finally melted and hammered out the unique instrument that can be used to attack his own regime. Add the rights of church and religion, sanctions against personal rights. Yeah, drafting commission is already under review. I think it's in European Council somewhere a couple of weeks ago. It was in the news that Ukraine is not supposed to be treating people like that during drafting. So we actually should have got there back a year ago, but there was a research done, but there was a lot of money pumped into this to depopularize it. The task was to make a hero out of Zelensky, to make sure that Ukraine fights longer. Hungarians will definitely continue pumping this topic, and however much Ukrainian armed forces would be talking about how many Hungarians are serving and fighting and dying for Ukraine, yes, of course, but here is a murder of a person. All right, if you have not done so, please click like and subscribe, and let's conclude the results of your voting for the question that we posted at the beginning of the stream. Wherever you're watching it, please do not forget to appreciate our work on either Alexey's channel, Alexander's channel, or here on the Privateer station. It's important for YouTube, so it understands that people who are watching these materials, so it can sort whom to suggest it to and whom to present the links to the stream. So why does Zelensky need new cabinet of ministers? The topics have split. That's interesting. 15% think that he wants to be liked by Trump. 22% say that he is feeling the destruction. 28% think that he is covering his tracks. And 35% he is trying to mark everybody as illegitimate. So this is the strongest vote. What do you say, Alexey? I don't think that it's about being liked by Trump. Not likely. The voices are split because nobody is even demanding, I think, these days to change government in Ukraine. Even Trump's administration is not supporting that much, as far as I understand. And the separation of vote indicates how confusing this action is in the society. Nobody understands why was it done. It was done with some violations, not a parliament. The president replaced these people. So again, nobody is really interested in these details. And the problem is that the power communicated it in a way that citizens see this as against the law, and this is not done according to the process, but they also do not understand the details and not really curious why. Why did we move Shmyhal from prime minister to a minister of defense? This is nonsense for a prime minister to become minister of defense. It needs to be communicated, right? Because you've been a general director and now you're a head of a department. Why? This is an interesting pirouette that needs certain explanation. Horrible communication, first of all, because they cannot. Second, they don't care because the serfs will eat it anyway. Or independent observers are now guessing why is that happening. And some false options, maybe wrong options, they become the leading meaning for this exchange. Or explain why Leshko, Minister of Health, who is a center of scandals, somehow remains in his position. Lysavoy is still there, another monster. We changed somehow Taras Grimin, who is engaged in a lot of scandals, but Lysavoy, who is marked and tarred by a lot more scandals, or not less at least, is still in power. Why Stefanishina, who is also being prosecuted under some corruption case, is going to Brussels? No communication, nobody explains anything. So probably not respecting their own people. Ukrainian power doesn't really want to communicate or try to create a pretense of visibility. Because I think everything was brought down to that fantastical purple ray. We're sending tomahawks to Moscow and people exhale till the next morning. They'll get enough dopamine to next morning, and next morning they'll get a bit more dopamine. End of the first hour.